What I'm going to talk about today is a series of trends in Europe that, in their combination, I feel are quite frightening and are a serious threat to the rule of law in Europe. In the information society, people who hold data on you have power over you. So data protection is to control the people who try to control you. That could be big business, or it could be the government, it could be the police or the Secret Service or your school or your employer. They should all be limited in what they can do with data on you, because the more data they hold on you, the more power they have over you, and that should be limited in a democratic society. The database state, which is the surveillance state, is already there. If you have the powers to connect the dots, if you have access to the different databases, you literally are naked. There is nothing that whoever has access to the combination of that data doesn't know about you.
How bothered do you think people really are about this?
Well, this is a big problem. Not very bothered is the simple answer. People find it very difficult to see the risks until it hits them. I was just saying that to one of the people who was listening to the lecture. And I said, well, people freely give their data. They know what they're doing. Well, they don't know what they're doing. At some stage, it bites them back. If suddenly, in 5 years' time, a student who puts a silly video on YouTube today is told you won't get a job, or is told you can't go and study here abroad, or you won't get a loan, that's when it'll hit them. It'll be too late. It's going to be very difficult to educate the public in this. If I get arrested by a biased policeman, says, you come with me, right? I say, why? He said, well, you're between 20 and 25-year-old, and you're black and a woman, and that's my target. And I don't like blacks and women, and I'm therefore arresting you, right? I can do something about it. I can complain to the man's boss, and I said he's a biased bigot. Second, if you get arrested because the computer says you have a score of more than 87, what do you do about it? Not even the policeman knows why he has to arrest you. It's because the computer was so clever that it came up with a configuration that it alone knows the reason for. Very, very dangerous. That's the first objection. Whenever there is a good reason to share data, I have no problem with it. And the basic laws that are in place are fine. And that means, for instance, you can take action as a policeman, provided that you have real factual evidence, that it is reliable evidence, that it is assessed, that maybe you put it in some kind of document that has to be certified by a judge. There have to be safeguards. The problem is that these safeguards get thrown out of the window because it's so easy to just bypass it and grab everything you can get. And that is where the problem is. The traditional safeguards are being undermined in these various data sharing arrangements. Data protection law in Europe is based, starts with the Council of Europe Convention number 108 from 1981 or 82, I forget. That is still the basic legal instrument that started with the data protection principle, was largely drafted by a very nice man called Frits Hondius, who was a senior official in the Council of Europe. I worked with him. Then the Council of Europe made a recommendation under the convention called R8715, which is on personal data processing for police purposes. That is still an excellent recommendation. It is officially referred to in pretty much all European instruments relating to policing and data protection. The Schengen Treaty, the Europol Treaty, they all refer to this. But the Commission would like, and the Council would like to forget about it. In the draft framework convention, it is rather played down, and in some other websites, funnily enough, you can barely find the thing anymore. But that is still, and it's going to be very difficult for the European authorities to go against the principles that are set out in that recommendation. One of the principles that it says is sensitive data. There's data on sex, race, ethnic origin, medical stuff, things like that, shall only ever be collected when it is absolutely strictly necessary in a particular case on a case-by-case basis. That means, by implication, that you cannot use those data for profiling.
so many of the problems can happen when different agencies share information for a purpose for which
Right.
the information was not intended.
Right.
But if citizens perhaps have the access to the same
Right.
data that government has, does
Right.
that somehow make you more comfortable with this data being collected and shared?
Well, it would if it was a feasibility, and I've discussed this with my colleagues. I think it would. Some people have suggested it's quite a nice idea, including my colleague Ian Brown that I've mentioned in the lectures. That once a year you should get a report about what data everybody has on you and what they've done with it. The problem is that that's going to be a telephone book-sized book, and you're not going to be that bothered about everything in it. But if you were to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, you would be startled and scandalized by the odd entry. And it would make you very angry. What are you going to do about that? In theory, you have these rights. You have the right to ask people what data they have on you, who did they get it from, what are they using it for, who did they pass it on for. But there are all kind of loopholes in that. For one thing, it takes a lot of effort to try and get this information. Secondly, people may be lying to you, or they may be awkward about it. They can ask money for it. By the time you've asked everybody what data they hold on you, you may be several hundred euros the poorer. And you still wouldn't have a complete picture about what certain agencies like the police and the secret services might be doing about you. There was a battle, if you like, between the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe in Germany and the court in Luxembourg. And the response of the court in Luxembourg was, we will always give the same level of protection to human rights as any of the member states gives under its own constitution. That was marvelous. You know? But it applied in the first pillar. If you start taking measures in the third pillar that affect people's fundamental rights, the same issue will come back. And when, I think it was the Maastricht Treaty was agreed, a German went to the Constitutional Court again and challenged the treaty. And the Constitutional Court in Germany ruled that the treaty was acceptable. And everybody sighed a big sigh, hurrah, we can go ahead with it. But if you read the judgment carefully, it says it's only acceptable because the treaty itself does not impose any restrictions on any fundamental rights of any citizen. But if measures are taken in the third pillar that do impact on the rights of an individual citizen that are protected by the German Constitution, we, the German constitutional judges, again reserve the rights we said we had in so lange one. Sorry if I get too technical for the non-lawyers. And it means we will be able to reassert those constitutional rights over and above the European rulings. And I can see that happening. I really can see that. I hope in a way that it will happen. That somebody will challenge some of the measures that are taken in the third pillar.
And finally, I guess if you could have your say in front of lawmakers on the European level with some of the policies that maybe are not happy with their proposals at the moment, what would you have to say? Where would you direct them to look for a better model?
One country from which we can learn an awful lot is Germany, because they have had very good data protection principles, very highly enshrined in their law. There are other countries as well, Austria, Italy, Spain is actually very good at the moment. The principles are quite clearly there. What politicians and European politicians must do is two things. They must insist on their right to be heard and speak out, and they must educate themselves about the technologies and the implications of the technologies, because there's a lot of ignorance about exactly what is done, can be done, and what people think can be done but cannot be done.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, good luck.
Very
Thank you.
interesting lecture.